We like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Hey, welcome to the Supernatural Podcast. The Supernatural Hour.
It is a supernatural hour.
It is, it's pretty supernatural. What we are going to be talking about today is deathbed phenomena. And if you remember, it wasn't too long ago we talked about
Near-death experiences?
near-death experiences, and this is different. Similar-ish, but different. So this isn't, with the near-death experiences, you know, people would clinically be dead. They would experience something, you know, and you can argue, it can be argued either way, you know, that it's, you know, afterlife experiences, paranormal, the spirit world. You can argue that it's, you know, simply brain function and reliving embedded memories. And you can argue either way, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today, what we're going to talk about is what people do, the phenomena they do, the things that they say before they die, and these people stay dead. And I don't mean for that to sound cold and callous.
They're dead and they stay dead.
Yeah, it's not one of those Princess Bride moments where they're nearly dead.
well,
This one,
Doc has had a few of those.
This one is an all the way dead.
And he's had a few of those, too.
I get a little of both. That is what I do.
So I found this one to be very, very interesting. I find this very interesting. Even, as you know, with Lurch, he was a mortician for quite a few years, and just hearing some of the stories that he has to tell, and you know, and with him, they're dead. They're actually dead, and you know, not coming back, kind of a dead when you're embalmed.
Yeah.
And some of those are fascinating.
After they're embalmed, they're certainly dead. They're not coming back. I can guarantee that. But no, I mean it's something that I did for 10 years, and during that time, I had lots of discussions with family members talking about their loved ones, and it's something that happens quite a bit. I'm more of a religious type myself, and I've had discussions with people that are agnostic and atheist about different experiences that have occurred. But you know, a lot of times people will see other members of their family that have already passed on, having conversations with loved ones that are already deceased, and other family members there in the room with them, and you know, there's a moment of lividity where they kind of come to a little bit, and they start having discussions with other people that can't be seen in the room, perhaps by them only, and it happens quite a bit. My stepdad, actually, he passed away about a year and a half ago, and he told my mom about people that would come and visit him shortly before he died as well. But it's a pretty common occurrence, being visited by loved ones and relatives, just in preparation of crossing over to the other side.
Right, and it's interesting because in the research that I did, you just hear the same, and I don't want to say the same stories because everyone's stories is a little different, but you hear the same sequences, the same phenomena over and over and over again, and so it kind of tells you there's something to this. And again, it can be argued that it's, you know, chemical, it's a process of the body breaking down, or you could say it's paranormal.
Yeah, that's something that I've talked about with other people that aren't religious, and they've had really good counter discussions as well about you know, endorphins, or not necessarily endorphins, but just chemicals being released by the brain that cause hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations.
Euphoria.
Yeah, there's all kinds of explanations. You can write it off scientifically, or you can write it off by faith, and it's all just a matter of perspective.
Right. I tend to take a spiritual approach. I believe in an afterlife. I think it's absolutely something that goes on in our next phase of life. One of the gals I talked to, her name is Martha Atkins. Well, I didn't talk to her. I didn't call her up on the phone and have a chat with her. I watched a TED Talk.
She's dead. Martha's dead.
She's actually alive. She did a TED Talk, but she worked with, and I'm not sure, I was actually going to look this up and I didn't have a chance to, but she's either a doctor or a director at a like a retirement home or a hospice center. And what she said was really interesting. She says that with the modern hospice centers and people going into hospice and things like that we've taken death out of the home, because in the old days, you know, you'd get old and you die at home surrounded by your family. And so back in the old days, family was more accustomed to seeing all these phenomenon, the stories and the reaching out and all the things that we'll get into here in a minute. But it scares people now because they don't see it. The only people that really see it are the nurses. And it's interesting, I'll read you a couple quotes later on. Even doctors aren't really aware of it, and Doc can let us know a little bit. And I'm sure it's not all doctors, but...
go ahead.
I will say, having working in the hospital, I would much prefer to die at home.
And that's something that actually it does happen more frequently. A lot of people do get put into nursing homes, but a lot of people, from my experience, a lot of people do have full care hospice nurses that come to their home. My stepdad, he had a hospital bed set up in his downstairs room, and they had a hospice nurse come in and check on him periodically. But a lot of people don't feel comfortable with it. That's something that's unique about the United States, is that we kind of put everything behind that black curtain. You don't want to see it. Death is ugly. It's not pleasant. It's not pretty. And I think a lot of people don't want to be exposed to the unpleasantries. You go to other countries and they kind of celebrate death. They have parades in the streets and carry their casket over their heads and have all kinds of celebrations and stuff. But here in the United States, we're kind of like, when I was a funeral director, we were kind of like the plumbers that came to fix the overflowing toilet in the middle of the night. You walk in, you're very respectful, very somber, and you take the body out discreetly. It's covered in a blanket. You put it into a car that has tinted windows. There's no advertising, and it's very. I think a lot of people just don't want to be exposed to the unpleasantries.
Yeah. Let me add to that. There's a lot of times, even with patients that come to the hospital, they are do not resuscitate patients, do not intubate patients, no CPR, on hospice, expected to die at home.
Yeah.
And family members panic. And what they do is they call 911, they put this person in an ambulance who does not want to die at the hospital. They come anyway because the family is afraid of death. And they'll ask me things, well, I can't get them to eat, I can't get them to drink.
It's normal.
Yeah, they're constantly sleeping. What's wrong with them? And my answer is they are dying.
Yeah, they want to go, and you need to let them go too.
Right. There's a doctor, his name is Dr. Christopher Ken, and he said that in medical school, and again, Doc can give us some of actual doctor insight on this, but he said at medical school and, doctors in general, you're trying to defy death. You're trying to keep people alive. You're trying to give them a better quality of life. And he says, and when he says the doctor's mentality is defy or deny.
Right. That's probably true. One thing that I've learned over time is that there is a huge difference between prolonging someone's life and delaying someone's death. Once the quality is no longer there, it's, I think, a lot easier for me to deal with this idea that we're marching down a path that it takes us all. We're all going to die.
Right. And I don't remember which two of these I read a whole bunch of stuff, and then I lost my notes, and so I had to do different research. It's pretty awesome. And then in about a half hour, I'll find the old notes. That's how it works. But so one of the things that both of these, Dr. Ken and Martha Atkins both said, was that learning about it and knowing when it happens kind of takes that fear away. And so it's not a bad thing. When it's time for people to go, it's time for people to go. So this is from Martha Atkins. She said that there's actually been about 600 years of research. And I don't know if people have been researching this over 600 years or if they've just taken information from the last 600 years. But either way, 600 years of research. There's several things they say to watch for. One is tracking things under their eyelids. She said specifically her mother was in the process of, being towards the end of her life, and she watched her mom, her eye track something under her eyelid, and she said, "Mom, who are you seeing?" And her mother, told her, "I'm seeing this person and that person," and Martha said, "Do you see my brother, who had died about 13 years previously?" She goes, "Oh yeah, he's been sitting over here in this chair for, the last couple days. You haven't seen him?" And Martha's like, "No." Another really common thing is reaching for things. You'll hear this over and over and over again, of just reaching
Doc's
for the
nodding
sky.
his head.
Yes, they do.
Yep. Another thing was they'll be met by friends or family members, and they'll talk about not only family but a rugby team. My rugby team came, or the neighbors came, or my good friend from college came. There was a man that they talk about who was so afraid of dying for whatever reason. They didn't get into why he was afraid of it, but he was so terrified. And part of it was he didn't want to meet up with his family, so there must have been some
They
sort
had
of
been
abuse.
abusive. Yeah,
Okay.
they said his family had been very abusive to him when he was a child.
Right. And so because of that, his family wasn't there, but there was a little 7-year-old boy that would come and sit with this man. He was an older man, like in his 90s, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And his wife said that she just kind of ran with it because, she knew, and she was a little bit more informed and wasn't afraid like, some people are. And she said, I just ran with it. And she said, this little 7-year-old boy, according to my husband, was there for about 2 weeks. And for her, she said it was just very comforting knowing that they were comfortable. Whether it's real, whether it's embedded memories, whether it's hallucinations, I think it brings comfort to not only the families, knowing that your loved one is passing comfortably, but it brings comfort to them as well.
Well, I was
Yeah.
just going to say, too, that's probably why the 7-year-old boy showed up, is because he feared having to face his family, and that might have been just like a messenger to help comfort him in his final days.
Right, because if it's a real thing, the Almighty, whoever you may think that is not going to send someone that you dread to die, because I think that our higher power wants us to be happy and wants things to be comfortable and the transition to go smoothly, and so he's not going to send down people that are going to make you upset.
Yeah, one of the stories that I liked was the one about the father that had the little 3-year-old boy that was dying of cancer. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
And he said, Daddy, I've got to go get on the train.
Right, and that's one of the things is they use certain words that talk about leaving. They use trains, I've got to go.
Where are my shoes?
Where are my shoes? I need my purse. And, these could even be people that have been bedbound for years and years and years, but they just will use words that, metaphors of leaving, of going, is very, very common. Suddenly, angels and religious entities that are important to them, whether it's Buddha, whether it's God, whether it's Allah, whatever, Mary, certain saints, whatever religious icon was important to that person, they will start talking about that religious icon a lot. And they said that even sometimes they'll start talking about landscapes and music as though they're seeing something that you're not seeing.
Chris, as our resident witch, I'm just curious to hear your take on this in terms of, getting close to death, seeing entities, religious figures, etc.
In paganism and witchcraft and all that Wicca, death is not as scary as it seems to be in, other religions, especially like Christianity. Like, I know a lot of people raised LDS and Catholic who are just so scared to die, which is funny. I don't look at death as something terrifying. I think in order for you to live is to die. Like, if you're not living, what's the point? We've, especially, in my beliefs, we have multiple different aspects of things, but one of the things that it comes as is the Meadowlands, which is kind of like the Christian heaven. There's also multiple different degrees of versions of hell. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely an aspect that death is a good thing. It's going from one life to another life. But we also, there's a broad aspect view that of reincarnation. Deja vu is you've lived a life before and you had a similar experience, which causes you the deja vu. And, throughout time, you keep coming back until you have learned everything you learn, and you don't have to come back. So that's, just death itself is more of a celebration than a fear in that aspect of things. So, it's kind of like how, you like jack-o'-lanterns on Samhain. It brings your loved ones back to your home. So it's interesting, especially with some of the things that I did read on this subject. of what people said, like how you said with hallucinations, especially with children dying. In some of them say they see an angel. Well, if it's a hallucination, sorry, I can't speak. English is hard.
Hey, us too.
Your typical image of an angel has wings, right? These angelic wings. But never once has anybody described these angels or these beings with angelic wings. So it makes you wonder if it is a hallucination based off of the images that we are raised with.
Right.
So it's interesting.
So you just kind of staying on that kids thread. They said that kids will have kid-friendly experiences. And there's one little boy that they talked about, and specifically I think he was about 7 years old, and he was in a children's hospital. And the nurse said that he kept complaining about the noises in the corner. And she said, "What noises in the corner?" And she, what's there? And he says, "Well, there's 3 kids over there." And she said, "Well, who are they?" And he named them off, and they were 3 children who had been there previously, like when he first got to the hospital. In that room. And they had, one by one passed away before him. And, there's no way he would have known about them.
And he called them by name.
And then they've also said that this kind of a phenomenon doesn't happen to just one specific type of person. It happens across all ages, all religions, all races. It happens to blind people, it happens to deaf people, it happens to dumb people. And by dumb, that can't speak, not like idiots.
It probably happens to dumb people too.
Exactly. Dumb people, smart people. It's just, really across the board. So here's an interesting story I found. There was a man, and he was kind of in his last stages of life. I think he was suffering from an illness, and so I don't know that death was necessarily imminent, because his wife said he was still talking lucidly. He was actually playing Sudokus, a couple times a week. So it wasn't like he was on death's door at any second per se. And but it was coming, and so his wife asked him if he had ever seen anybody, and he says, yeah. He says, there's a soldier that comes and sits by my bed at night, and kind of keeps him company. And then he says that there was a dog that would sit by his feet. And when he described the dog, it was a dog that they had early on in their marriage, and they were probably in their 60s or 70s at this point. And so it's a dog that they hadn't had for quite some time.
I think that's one of the things I'm looking forward to most about dying, is seeing all the dogs that I had. I had some good dogs, and I miss them, and they're, animals are very loyal. So I
all
can relate to
dogs
that.
go to heaven?
All dogs go to heaven.
They do. See, the movies are right. I actually won't watch
Those
those
are
movies.
documentaries.
They're documentaries.
I'm
I don't
with
do
you,
sad
Lurch.
movies.
If my wife is not gritting me, I would like my dog to.
Yeah.
So, again, they say they hear and see things that you can't. They reach for things. They will look through you. They'll talk in metaphors about moving, leaving, looking for their shoes, going to a stadium. They'll even say very specific things. It's interesting because nurses said that they will tell a doctor, oh, he's going to die really soon, and the doctor will say why, and they'll say because of the signs. And in fact, this Dr. Ken that we talked about earlier was telling a nurse one day, and he eventually moved in and was working in he was started out as in a hospital or a clinic or something, and then he moved to a hospice center later in his medical career, and he told this nurse, now, with this patient you need to do X, Y, Z, and she said, no, he's dying. And he said, why? How do you know that? And she said, well, he's starting to talk to his deceased family. And the Dr. Ken said, well, I don't remember that class in medical school. And she said, you missed a lot of classes in medical school. I mean, she kind of gave him the business because he hadn't really worked in that setting.
Yeah, it's a
for a
definite
while.
phenomenon. Working in emergency medicine, I generally see people die quickly. Not usually this prolonged hospice, long-term chronic illness type stuff. But I will say, family will report all the time when they bring people in, they're starting to talk to people that no one else can see. Just kind of goes along with people dying. This is a very common phenomenon that we see that's pervasive throughout all cultures, I believe.
Right. So there's another story about Butch. He was 94 years old, so, when you get to be that age, you can go any minute. And he had congestive heart failure, and he elected for hospice, and he actually did hospice at home. So he was at home. And
Smart man.
his daughter said he started having the visions and started telling her things, and she was actually quite astute. And I don't know if she had already knew stuff or if she just was kind of naturally this way. But he, in his day, was actually quite a famous rugby player in a different country. And he said that his rugby team, all of his buddies, would come and visit him on these long ladders, and he'd get mad because they'd leave, and when they left, they'd leave shorter ladders, and he couldn't climb up as high as he needed to get to them. He would also tell her that he was really mad one day because he'd packed a suitcase and he was all ready to go when they came, but they left without him. And so she kind of knew, okay, it's coming. And the doctor said a lot of times when this happens, sometimes the doctor, will medicate. And I hate saying this because I don't want Doc to think I'm slamming on him. I'm just telling you what a different doctor said. But he said sometimes they'll medicate them because of these hallucinations, but it's just the process they go through. So the last thing that Butch did was just before he died, he had, and this is a common metaphor of completing something, he had a bunch of mechanical pieces that he didn't want lost. And he said, she says, "What are you doing?" And he held out his hand and he says, "I've got these pieces and I don't want them lost." And so she says, "Okay, well, hang on." And she went and got a baggie. And she didn't have to do that. There was no pieces. His hand was just,
Take
sticking
those
out.
pieces.
And this was Martha Atkins, and she said, this lady, could have just ignored it and blown it off, but she said, if you do that, you can really miss an opportunity to connect with your loved ones, especially right before they die. And, it makes the person that's dying feel a little bit better because they get to fulfill that completion of whatever thing they're trying to do. And so, if you've got someone in your home that's going through this process, watch for those little things, because those are some really cool ways to connect for that last time or two.
Yeah, and even if you don't believe it, if it's not doing any harm, just roll with it.
Right.
It'll bring comfort. It'll bring peace. Instead of creating more confusion, because when you try to tell somebody, what are you doing? There's no pieces in your hand. It's only going to worsen the delirium, the confusion, whatever you want to call it. And by giving them that sense of validation, yes, I'll take these pieces. Your mission is done. Whatever needs to be said there, I think it could bring some peace and comfort and an opportunity, like you said, to connect.
Right. So one of the things too is this Martha Atkins. She was funny. If you look her up, if you want to watch this little TED Talk, it wasn't very long. It was 12 minutes, I think. And she was funny. She said one of the things that happens to her when people know what she does, studies death phenomena. She says, usually people do one of two things. She says the first one is they'll say, we're going to go over there and get a drink, and then they never come back. She says the other thing, and she said this happened even just today, is they'll pull me aside and they'll say something along the lines of, I want to tell someone the story, but I don't dare tell anybody because I'm afraid that they're going to think I'm crazy. And that resonated with me because I cannot tell you how many times people have called me and said, so-and-so gave me your number, and they will beat around the bush on the phone for about 10 minutes, hemming and hawing for, to come do a residential. And I finally, probably a dozen times in the last 2 or 3 years, I've had to say, okay, I will believe you. We go on residential investigations, several times a month. Just tell me what's happening, because people get so afraid of being labeled as crazy or just out there. So, and she told people in her audience, this was in San Antonio, and she said, how many people here have dealt with a loved one or a friend who have gone through this phenomenon and have some sort of a story to share with others? And they didn't show the audience, but my guess is half the people probably raised their hand, half to a quarter. And she looked at them and she said, I want you in the next 48 hours to tell your story to someone. And her big push was, not to have people be afraid of dying. It's a natural part of life. It's going to happen to all of us, whether we like it or not. So,
one of the things too that I was thinking about that happens pretty regularly is when people are waiting to pass away, and they have family members sitting there with them. I used to hear it so many times. People would be like, I just got up, I left the room to go get a soda down the hall, and I came back and Mom was gone. And that happens so frequently, where I think the person that's about to pass, maybe they feel more comfortable when there's no one physical in the room. I don't know what it is, but I've heard that same situation being shared many times with people saying, I was sitting there for days, I slept in the room, I wanted to be there when they passed away, and I got up and I left the room for 5 minutes and came back and they were gone.
Yeah, it's almost like that will to live is there as long as your family members are present.
Exactly.
And when they step away, it almost gives that person the opportunity to just
The permission.
let go,
Yeah.
permission to go.
Exactly. Like they no longer feel the burden to have to hold on, and they realize that they're finally, by themselves, and they can just quietly slip away.
Which is the exact opposite to how we feel as friends and family. We all want to be there for them. And there are some people, their wishes are, I don't want to die alone, and they want somebody who's there with them.
My father was like that, and my brother was actually there. We got the call, what was it, about 2 in the morning?
yeah.
But yeah, a lot of what I've been kind of reading into is that, you shouldn't expect to be present when these people pass away, because they will most likely pass in your absence.
Yeah.
But many of them want you to be
Yeah.
there, not necessarily at the moment of death, but be there
To
with
comfort
them.
them through the
support.
process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But
I
like you
figure-
say, sometimes they slip out when you've slipped out. My grandfather, for example, he'd had a surgery and had been doing quite well and was actually being ready to be checked out. And a friend of the family was in visiting with him, and she stepped out of the room and came back in, and he was gone.
Yeah, it's just that moment to finally pass away because they don't feel like they're, being watched, being supervised.
It's like when you're hosting friends and family and you're ready for them to go, but you
Yeah.
don't want to say anything. Just
Right?
kind of hang on for a while, and you're
Worn
like,
out,
all right, can y'all get out of my house, please?
Yeah.
And then they
Leave
finally go, and you're
now.
like, yes, let down.
Isn't there a far side where they're like, we have to
That's
fake
when you
death?
take advantage. I'm dumb.
Maybe let's pretend to fall asleep, maybe they'll leave.
That's right.
So I've got one last story that they shared, and there was a lady, and I believe she was at home, and elderly, expected to die, because of some health issues, and it was just a matter of when, not if, which I guess is all of us, quite honestly, but hers was a little more imminent than hopefully mine is, and her daughter saw her one day cradling a baby, and they said, "Mom, who you cradling? Who you got there?" And they said, "Oh, it's my baby. His name is Danny." And everybody, Danny. No one knew who a Danny was. They just thought, "Oh, mom's gone crazy," and no one understood it. But their first child, the oldest child who lived out of state, came in because they're like, Mom's only got a few days left, so you better get here. So she got there, and they said she keeps cradling this baby and calling it Danny. And the oldest child was the only one that remembered that the mom had had a baby before. So Danny was actually her first child. And it just was so painful to her that she lost this baby that she didn't tell anybody about it. And so the only person that knew about it was the oldest child. And
I think it was a sister, actually, that came in. Her sister. It wasn't the oldest
Oh,
child.
the mother's sister?
That was the mother's sister.
Oh, okay. I kind of suck at telling stories.
No, you're doing fine.
Somebody knew about Danny and told the rest of the family that she'd actually had this first baby. And so, it's almost as though at that moment of death, all of your earthly pains and issues are, one, you forget about most of them, but you've got family and friends, and you just have these spiritually healing moments so that when you pass, you do so just comfortably is the point of everything that I researched.
Okay, so I got a little tangent.
Okay.
Trevor mentioned the far side, just briefly. And there's a Gary Larson Far Side cartoon about a stegosaurus that thumped Thrag, and he was the caveman. It's the old caveman, and the paleontologists and people that do dinosaurs have actually named the tail of the stegosaurus
I've seen
a
that,
thagomizer.
Yeah.
Because that's what killed Thag. It didn't have
I've
a name
seen
before
panel.
that.
Yep.
It's the thagomizer. I was actually watching a YouTube video the other day, and they talked about the thagomizer on the
And it's just like a last little segment of the tail for one particular species of dinosaur. Yeah.
And just like that, we're no longer talking about Deathbed.
Hey,
Welcome to the
Thag-
Paleontology
Thag-
Hour.
Thag made the deathbed.
All right.
I'll tell you what, when it comes to dying, back on topic, I got done with a pretty rough day taking care of COVID patients. The other day I got showered off, hopped in bed, and just kind of melted into my mattress. And I looked over at my wife and I said, I'll bet this is what dying feels like. And she probably thought I was crazy. But my point was, you go through life, it's supposed to be a struggle, it's difficult, and it only gets harder as you get older. And I can only imagine that moment where everything is done and you're willing to just release and let go is probably the most incredible experience ever.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to finish. I use like a baseball analogy. Hitting a home run and run around the bases with a clean jersey on. I want to be covered in dirt and slide into home plate with, the catcher trying to block me as the ball's coming in, over my head. It's like I want to experience life and really just feel like my body's worn out when it's time to go.
Right. Yep. Me too.
I'm not afraid of death. Just got a lot of living left to do.
Exactly. And I actually read a lot of patients who are scared of death on that deathbed when they see somebody. It seems like the pain is gone, and they're actually excited and they want to go with these people.
Mm-hmm.
They're no longer scared.
Yeah.
See, and that is a perfect segue into Steve Jobs' last words. He had 6 words that were his last words. Does anyone here know what those are? Have you guys heard this before? Yep. He says, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." He said it 3 times. And I thought, interesting.
Well, I kind of like to think that when we do die, that like the secrets and the mysteries of the universe are going to be revealed to us. Like even the stuff that we don't really have the comprehension to understand, we don't really have the brain capacity to fully understand. Like I'm really interested in like science and the universe and just things that are out there, physics and stuff that I can't even comprehend right now. I like to think that when I pass, that I'll be able to understand that stuff. It'll make sense. And the secrets of life, the mysteries of life, of life in the universe and everything that we don't know right now. I think all of that will be revealed to us, and it'll be kind of cool to look behind the curtain and see the wizard there.
Yeah, I'm interested, but I want a few more years here first, though.
Good idea.
About 30. 30 years sound good.
Okay.
It's an episode.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright by Advanced Paranormal Services.